Hey everyone, thanks for joining. I'm speaking with Keri Smith again. Keri is the co-host of the Unsafe Space podcast, and they also do Deprogrammed. And Keri is a self-confessed ex-woke person, ex-SJW. So I figure I asked her to come back on so we can have our own little struggle session about struggle sessions. Hey Keri, thanks for coming on.
Hi, Obaid. I'm happy to be back here.
Yeah.
You made me laugh before the show. Can I tell people?
Sure, go ahead.
Obaid said, because I'm doing a juice fast, and he said, "That's so dumb. Why would your body needs nutrients? It's like believing in the. Why would you do that? It's like believing in the secret." And I said, "I do believe in the secret."
Okay, but that's just it. Okay, like believing in the secret. If you've actually looked into it, right? I mean, I don't want to get into this. I don't want to have a big, huge. If you want, we can. But the woman who wrote The Secret, if you go back to it, there was I believe the guy was a janitor in the 20s or the 30s, came up with that idea. She redid it in like whatever the 90s or something like that, and then she spoke with what's that woman, Esther Hicks, and Esther Hicks had something to do with it. And then there's an interview with Esther Hicks on Oprah, and the only reason I know this is because a friend of mine got into this, and I just wanted to find out what it was.
Okay.
And there's Esther Hicks talking on Oprah, and she's like, she was reading the Ramtha books. And if you don't know who Ramtha is, he was some woman, I can't forget her, something Myers, I think. She said that he was a 30,000-year-old Atlantean spirit that possessed her, and she was speaking through him. So Esther Hicks said, well, I read the Ramtha books, and it just clicked, and then we started doing this. I mean, it's a scam from day one.
Well, okay, here's what I think about it. I haven't actually read them. I always thought it was a scam. It's only recently that I've started to think, I had a friend who read The Secret, was telling me about it. And so my opinion is based on not having read the book. But recently I changed my mind because the friend was telling me about what she believes The Secret's really about, the law of attraction or whatever. And I'm like, I actually believe in that. I just wouldn't call it the law of attraction. But I do believe in what you go out and seek to create, like going out with a positive frame of mind and knowing what it is you're pursuing and knowing what path you're on. I think you will draw more of those things into your life. It's almost like when Jordan Peterson talks about the Matthew principle.
Okay, yeah, no, I 100% I agree with that. If you have a positive attitude and you are positive and you're helpful and you're generally a decent person, people will be more or less decent to you. Like, on average, you're going to run into the assholes and stuff like that. If you have a plan for what you want to do and you follow that plan, and it basically just, okay, you have a big, broad plan, you break it down into little steps, but then it adds the Deepak Chopra woo into it, right? Everything is quantum. So they talk about the uncertainty principle, right? And they talk about the double slit experiment. So the double slit experiment was when you pass electrons through two slits. There's no sensor, there's no nothing. When they hit the wall, they make a wave formation. As soon as you put a sensor there and you start measuring it, because to measure, it's so small, you have to use light to measure it. So when you measure it, you make it choose its state. And as soon as you make it choose its state, it goes from either a 1 or a 0. Before it'll go wherever it wants and whatever the probability is. And so as soon as that sensor was there, it changed. So you only had 2 lines on the back of the wall, right? That when they went through the slit. So they take that and they say, and then there's the observer effect. Just by observing something, you change it, but that is at the quantum level. So they say that applies to a house. If you want that house, you picture that house in your head, you visualize that it's there. They tell you to put it out into the vortex. And if you listen to Esther Hicks, she's speaking to a community of extra dimensional or extraterrestrial beings that are, like there is, and then she calls them Abraham. You should watch her. She goes into it's like people going into when they start speaking in tongues and stuff like that. It's so they take that kernel of truth about the uncertainty principle and the observer effect, and then they apply it macroscopically, and it doesn't work macroscopically. Quantum rules, we are affected. We are governed by quantum rules, but we don't see them because if you follow the quantum law and you listen to quantum physics, it's really, really screwed up, and I don't understand it. Like, I'm a layperson, and I'm butchering this beyond belief. But,
well, you're doing better than I would.
Theoretically, you can lean up against a wall, and there is a possibility where your state will become, like the space between your molecules will become big enough that you can slide through that wall. All right. And there is a probability of it. So all particles are, so when you say a particle can either be a wave or a particle, like light can be either a wave or a particle, the wave in itself is the probability of where that particle will be. So where you see the waves high, like the crests, that's the highest probability. Where you see it go low, that's the lowest probability. Quantum physics will never tell you where that will go up. It'll tell you the probability. And the only way to find something out is to look at it. But to look at an electron, it's so small, you need a little bit of light. And however small that bit of light is, to hit that electron, you move it. So that's where the observer effect comes in. So you can know the spin of something or you can know the speed of it, but you can never know both. It's I mean, like I said, I'm butchering this. Like I wasn't planning on talking about this, and I would have like done a little bit of a refresher, not sound like such an idiot. But yeah, so that's where like the law of attraction and The Secret and all that, they play off of that. And again, because of a friend of mine who was into this crap, and I'm like, what are you talking about? And I just went back and looked into it, and you could follow the trail of bullshit all the way through to the law of attraction. So I don't deny that positive thinking helps. It doesn't help. I don't deny that having a plan doesn't help. Because, just say, yeah, I want to be a billionaire and you have no plan to do it. Good luck, right? Like, I want to win the lottery. It will help me if I buy a ticket. No, but I'm just saying, if I want to win the lottery.
I want to buy a ticket, yes.
But if I want to win the lottery and I want to do it by finding the winning ticket, like my chances go a lot more. Like, and that's what this is kind of is. It's like, okay, it's like critical race theory. Yes, racism exists, right? There's that kernel of truth. Then all the other garbage that goes along with it. So that's why like I said, I don't believe in it. There's nothing to believe in. It's just, it is once you get to the little metaphysics of it, it just turns to absolute garbage.
Well, thank you for killing my joy, Obaid. I'm joking. I'm totally kidding.
Yeah, I know.
I'm totally kidding.
Well, okay. Well, thank you for making me expend my emotional labor.
It was a really funny start to the morning. I just had to share it with everyone.
Yeah. No, but it was just, like I said, it just, that's why I'm like, it's that kind of stuff. But anyways, so struggle sessions. First thing I really wanted to ask you is, because I've been talking to people about this, but that video from New York City, the Council of Education, I don't know if you saw it, where they were,
yes.
Okay. When you were hanging out with your friends, when you were, whatever, quote unquote, woke, however you want to describe it, was that what hanging out was like?
Okay, that's what it was like at conferences.
Yeah.
And sometimes at like meetings, like workshops or stuff. Not hanging out like every day as friends, but anything official, it could easily go there because people are emboldened by this idea that they are if they check off more of the marginalized boxes than the privileged boxes, and then they're more marginalized than you. And what I would often see is things would devolve into infighting over who was the most oppressed or who was somehow breaking one of the belief system's tenets, who was not being ideologically pure enough. So in the case of that New York City Council of Education video, he's not being ideologically pure because he's daring to have his friend's
nephew on his knee.
Who is, I couldn't believe her screaming at him. When people see a white man with a boy of color on his knee, it harms them. What? Yeah, that's when you've really swallowed so much garbage that your brain has turned to garbage.
Okay, but like, let's say with friends, would there be like, we're sorry, but X over here has stepped out of line. We need to have an intervention. Like, would there be an intervention when someone's going not woke enough, or like,
there would be. Okay, so I was on the board of a couple different social justice themed nonprofits. Mm-hmm. There would be something similar to that when they felt that somebody again wasn't being pure enough or wasn't being. So, for example, this national group I was on the board of, I helped with the LA chapter, the Los Angeles chapter. And the woman who really headed up the LA chapter, who did all the work, I just helped her out occasionally. At the national level, I got a call. They wanted to talk to her because they felt like she wasn't doing enough outreach to people of color to get them into it was a feminist group, to get them into the group. and it was a huge, and then there was always like this backbiting between different chapter heads and stuff. The same kind of drama that you would see play out in a middle school, but it plays out around this ideology, you know? Or at one year, so she asked, she had different panels happening at Santa Monica College, and she asked a lot of the different women who came to our meetings and stuff to be on the panels. So one of those women, who an Asian woman, ended up putting her on blast on like a public email chain with every woman in the LA group on it, or at least those in leadership positions. And it was like, you know, I see what you're doing, and I see you're using us women of color on your panels as tokens, and you're bringing us in so we can educate the white people. And it was like, wait a minute, 2 years ago, everybody was bitching that she didn't have enough people of color. Now it's like, now you have people of color, and you know, you can never win in this belief system. And it was a huge drama thing, like, you know, that she's just using our labor and using us to educate people. It's like, okay, but when it wasn't enough women of color on the panels, everybody was pissed. Like,
no, I mean, that's just it. It's all it is looking. It's trying to find problems in the most trivial things. Yeah. I mentioned this to you earlier. Like, because I've read so much of this, I'm starting to see it everywhere. I'll give you. I'm a geek. The only TV show I like watching is Jeopardy, aside from sports. But the only thing so the last couple of weeks have been showing some repeats, I guess because of COVID or whatever, right? And there was one episode where there was an Indian guy and 2 white contestants. The question was related with either Hinduism or with India. One of the white contestants gets it right, and then Alex says, "Oh, blah blah blah, you know, too bad for so and so. You know, I guess he's a little embarrassed that he didn't answer the question about India." And right away in my head is like, Alex is canceled. Oh my God! Like, and then I'm like, and how dare that white person answer that question about India and let the person like right away. It just took me about 10 seconds, and I'm like,
you know what that's doing, Obade, is you are, even though you're not a social justice warrior, the culture's become so dominant, and you're starting to understand it well enough that you have a little internal SJW in your head.
Yeah, but it's to problematize everything. It's to find the problem in everything. I'm like, why do you want to live like that? Why do you want to? It's such a depressing way to live. I mean, there is enough shit that's going on. Yeah. Why do you want to create more out of nothing? Like that's the one thing I don't understand. Like, I can understand religion more or less, right? I can get where that's coming from. I don't agree with it. I think a lot of it's hooey, but there is an internal structure with this. Like you said, if not enough people of color, that's racism. Too many people of color, that's racism. You know, silence is consent. Silence is violence. And if you speak up too much, you're centering it on yourself. You're taking it off people of color. Like, I mean, you can find problems in everything, and like I don't know how people can do this for any sustained amount of time, because it's tiring.
It's tiring, and somebody tagged me in this photo this morning. I want to show this to you. She said her friend shared this, and this is her white friend who's read White Fragility 3 times.
Oh, good.
Okay. So she could really let the bullshit soak in. This is something she shared, and I'll just read it to you, but it's a little graphic of a rabbit, and the rabbit is saying, "Repeat after me. No matter how open-minded, socially conscious, anti-racist I think I am, I still have old, learned, hidden biases that I need to examine. It is my responsibility to check myself daily for my stereotypes, prejudices, and ultimately discrimination." And it's like you're in this constant daily, like just an unhealthy mental space. It's basically like every day wake up and tell yourself that you have unexamined prejudices and racisms and bigotries that you're not aware of, but they're there, and you better seek them out. You better find them. You better find where they are.
But it's, I mean, and the other thing that I just don't like, you were mentioned it earlier, who's got the most oppression points?
Yeah.
They make a value out of being a victim. And I mean, okay, this is nothing against people who've been victimized or people who've been victims, but the honor in that is picking yourself up, carrying on, and you know, like there's the thing on a victim. It's like, and again, not to, you know, I don't want to tell anyone how to be a, you know, I've spoken to like grooming gang survivors from the UK, And if these people are having trouble getting back into society, I understand it. I'm not holding them down for it. But they're still trying, right? They're putting themselves forward and they're trying. There is the virtue in victimhood is you overcoming it and doing whatever you can. You might not, you might not be the top of your field, or you might not have bounced back 100%, but that attempt is what's important, not just the fact that you're a victim. And they make that the final goal. Like, you're a victim, then you deserve special respect and special treatment. And we're going to glorify you for being a victim. And as soon as you stop, then we're going to hate you. And
if you're not claiming the victimhood, if you're not speaking the ideology, there's no one they hate more than people who check off marginalized boxes and don't speak their belief system. But about the victimhood stuff, I was having a conversation with my boyfriend about this the other night, and we were thinking about so the way that one of the things that they say that they declare is a fact, right, is this whole idea of privilege, and that if you're in any of the so-called privileged or oppressor groups, that you universally have this privilege. But one of their and bear with me because I'm just still teasing this out. One of the shortcomings, it's something they completely ignore, is the fact that they also teach about intersectionality, which is that we all have multiple different identities, and so we can check off some marginalized boxes and some privileged boxes, and that these identities intersect, right? And these create an individual. But they never actually take that to its logical conclusion, which is that the end result of intersectionality is you get back to the individual, that every individual person has a multitude of individual marginalizations and privileges that you can't really calculate. How do you weigh those? I can't look at you and you can't look at me, and we can't know how easy each other's life has been just based on what boxes we check off. And they kind of ignore that. And so if you look at me, they would say, I'm privileged because I'm white, I'm marginalized because I'm a woman, and then there's a whole other list of boxes, right? But some of the things which most privileged people and which most marginalized people, they never talk about those things. Like, as a kid, it is on average, you have a much greater chance of being successful if you grow up in a stable home with two parents, right? They never talk about that. They never talk about child abuse. They never talk. So for me, for example, my greatest privilege in life is one that they never talk about. I would say the biggest privilege I had was that I was born in America. I'm an American, but that's not something to talk about. I'd probably say my second greatest privilege is that I came from a middle class home and we had means. I could go to college. But my greatest marginalization is that I grew up in an abusive home, and that did untold damage to me and my siblings as children. So my greatest marginalization is not that I'm a woman. I'm just saying this objectively. Is if I look at, and I don't think my greatest privilege is that I'm white. Do I think that is a privilege? Yeah, in some ways. But when they start to rank all these things and weigh them, it's like, how do you weigh an individual's, like, everything that's happened in their life that's helped to marginalize or privilege them in some ways? You can't. But they pretend that you can, and that it's some universal thing, and that somebody can walk into my home and I can know who they are, and I can know their level of power and privilege and marginalization. It's just impossible to do that.
No, yeah, and okay, like the individualism thing. That's it. Like, you see it. I'm seeing it more and more. They don't care that no individual. Like, okay, the system is racist. It's systemic racism. And, you can get down to what they mean by the system. Like, they don't mean the police system is racist. They don't mean, the medical system is racist. The whole system, on what that was built on, is racist. So there could be no individual act of racism for, like, say, the last 50 years. And you could prove it to them according to their bases, and they could agree. No individual act of racism has occurred, but they'll still say the system is racist. There is systemic racism. And we still have to undo the system. They don't care how that will hurt the individual. Like all those stores that got burned down, immigrant stores. Yeah. Property is violence. They don't care about that. They're like, you were taking part in the system. What was the end goal? Like, did you burn down the system? That's one thing. But what was the plan to build something up? Like, what was the replacement?
They don't have the secret, Obed. They don't have a plan.
No, but
No, but they don't. There's nothing that you're calling out what they really are versus what they say they are. I mean, they're ultimately, I on the large scale, I view this ideology is destructive.
oh, totally.
It's completely destructive. It's not about building anything, and it's not about it's not about any of the positive things that it disguises itself as. It's not about equality. It's not about tolerance. It's not about anti-racism or feminism. It's about destruction, sexism, racism, divisiveness, tearing people apart. Like, that's what this is. But it does such a good job of hiding itself that, I was in it for 2 decades. I'm in a place now where, now that it's become dominant culturally, mainstream, I believe, in the past month or so, I have a lot of parents contacting me who listen to our podcast or who've come across me on social media for some reason, and they want to know because I left it. They want to know, like, hey, my kids are getting pulled into this, or my kids have been pulled into this, and what can I do, and how can I talk to them? And it's like, there's no great, easy answer. And even if you look at me as a hopeful example, I was in it for 2 decades. That's a long time.
Yeah. I was speaking to so Benjamin Boyce was speaking about it the other day, and what I said to him was, because we were getting to, I don't want to say an argument, but we were going back and forth about the definition of whiteness, and because there was that woman from Cambridge, that professor, who said, I want to abolish whiteness and white lives don't matter as white lives. And then she ended up getting a promotion at Cambridge.
Wow, I missed that.
Okay. And he's like, well, that's what it's all about, right? I'm like, yes. Eventually it's to kill white people. Like, it can be taken to the extreme of kill whitey. But I want to deal with it as it is and what they say, because that's bad enough. And this is my approach. And I'm not saying it's the right approach, it's the only approach, but if you can lay out what whiteness is and explain it to them, explain to someone who's like, well, this sounds like a good idea, and then most rational people will say that's insane, and they'll leave it alone. So I look at it like it's a convert to Islam, or it's a convert to Scientology, or whatever. This is what this is. You're going into this thing, you don't know exactly what you're going into. And I tell them straight out, like, don't believe me. Read these things. I give them a list of books I read. I pass them to, James Lindsay's website there, New Discourses. I said, Go look at that. Because if you can stop someone before they become a fundamentalist, it's a lot easier than to de-radicalize them.
Yes.
And so, I look at, that's the idea that Faisal Al-Mutar has and Melissa Chen have with Ideas Beyond Borders, right? Get the ideas out there that are missing in the Middle East, get people exposed to those instead of just the fundamentalist Islam, so that you don't have to worry about de-radicalizing. They haven't become radicalized. So that's, like I said, that's my personal approach. It's to stop, because it is becoming so common. And right away, as soon as the protest started, or maybe even a day or two before, I think they started right away, but I saw people on my Facebook, and these are friends of mine who are the same age as me, who aren't in academia, who didn't do this stuff in schools. I met some of these people on military bases. They're working in the oil fields, and they're talking about their privilege, and they're asking other people why they're feeling fragile. And I'm like, you've never talked about this before, and all of a sudden you're using this language. Where is it coming from?
Where's it coming from? There were women in my church group. This is what let me realize. This is what helped me to realize how dominant it is now. There were women in my church group that I had been going to in Austin. I'm not going to this church anymore because it's clear to me that this belief, well, I had already kind of found a new church, and but then now it's become clear to me that this ideology is going to probably rot my old church from the inside out. But there were ladies in my church group who've never talked about this stuff before, have never been in this ideology before, who, like you're saying, suddenly their Facebook posts go from being pictures of the family and look what a great life I have to being, let's talk about white privilege and and I'm like, this, by the way, I've been in Bible study with you, women's Bible study, for over a year or so. And this is the ideology I've been talking about the whole time. And you say you can't. Wow. I was just shocked. But yeah, the seeds of this belief system have been spread so far and wide that I think what happened was that, because I was indoctrinated over 20 years ago, and I've been until I deconverted or came out of it a few years ago. I would go out, I pushed on everyone I met. I pushed it. I spoke as if we all agreed on these things. And if you didn't, and then I would take it as an opportunity to educate you on the new definition of racism, or my white privilege, and I pushed it. And so the seeds are everywhere. All that it's taken now, they basically, it could have been any awful event, but they took the death of George Floyd, they took that killing, and they've exploited it, and they've used it to, I think, move the ideology into a new phase. So now the phase is you have normies, like that lady from my church group, or like some of the people we know, normies who are suddenly speaking it, and it's like, where did this come from? Because it's saturated all of culture now. All the corporations are speaking it. Yep. McDonald's feed is nothing. It's just woke, 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 woke. It's disgusting. But
governments are speaking it.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if you saw this. If you haven't, I'll send it to you. It's a Twitter thread someone did, and it was a city of Seattle held a training session for white employees called "Interrupted Internalized Racial Superiority and Whiteness." This is internalized racial superiority for white people. This is what makes up whiteness: perfectionism, individualism, imposition, arrogance, paternalism, silence, intellectualization, control, violence, comfort, appropriation, cognitive dissonance, objectivity. And objectivity. Yeah. Okay. Now there's this from there. These people are doing a workshop. That was from Seattle, and this is from. These guys are doing an online workshop. It's called like Trout Leadership or something like that. Just give me a second. Sorry, I'll get it. It's on my. But it's basically the same thing. They said they want to dismantle white supremacy in the class, white supremacist culture in the classroom, and this is listing white supremacist culture in the classroom: perfectionism, power hoarding, sense of urgency, fear of open conflict, defensiveness, individualism again, quantity over quality, progress is bigger is more, worship of the written word, objectivity.
They're going after
the Enlightenment. They're going after the Enlightenment.
They're going after the Enlightenment. They want to destroy, this ideology seeks to destroy Western civilization. It seeks to destroy all the values of the Enlightenment. And what's funny about objectivity and individualism is they used to kind of cloak those things, the fact that those were enemies, and now they're just out in the open, like individualism is the devil, and individualism is, the craziest thing they say that I've heard people actually hear is they say, individualism is a tool of white supremacy. It's like, that doesn't make any sense. White supremacy is a collectivist belief system, just like social justice ideology. It's collectivism. Individualism is the antidote to both. But it's enough because a lot of people who repeat this stuff, they're not thinking people. That woman from my church is not I don't think she's going to sit down and think about, what does collectivism mean? What does individualism mean? Oh, okay, that doesn't make sense.
It's little sound bites like, don't you want to be anti-racist? If you don't know anything behind it, I mean, if I didn't know any of this stuff and someone said, wouldn't you want to be anti-racist? It sounds like a good thing, right?
Yeah.
And then when you explain it to someone, like I explained some of this stuff to my mom and she's looking at me like, these people are crazy. And my mom's in her 70s. Like, she's never heard this before. And she just looks, but like this whole thing, like I saw it again yesterday, 2 + 2 = 4 is a white person's way of doing things. This is white people's math.
Like, really? That's what it said?
Yeah. And then
they're going straight to the Orwell.
Oh, they said 2 + 2 = 4 is white people's math. And then that woman, she deleted her tweet, but it was someone with a blue check mark. That woman, Nicole Hannah-Jones, who wrote the 1619 project there, the revisionist history. Mathematics is she said mathematics is a white way of doing it, and how dare you use Arabic numerals to prove a white person's point. It's like, if it's Arabic numerals, then it's not a white way of doing things, you idiot. And again, Arabic numerals, they came from India. The Arabs stole them from India, and we know them as Arabic numerals because we got them from the Middle East. Like there's a quote, I might have told you this before, there's a quote from Plato talking about Egypt. And he says, look at the little children in Egypt, and they play games with math that men in Greece don't understand. And he compared men in Greece to pigs or dogs compared to the children in Egypt, because the children in Egypt knew math so much better than the people in Greece. Okay, Egypt is North Africa. Like, give me a goddamn break. This is not white people thing. Like, you think the Incas and the Aztecs, when they built their pyramids and figured out how Venus went across the sky, like, like they didn't know mathematics? Like, it's like, worship of the written word. Where would we be without the written word? Like, we wouldn't be having this conversation.
Or objectivity. That's amazing. They're trying to attack objectivity. I mean, but what is so frustrating about it for me, and I'm feeling this right now, is sometimes, we spend the whole podcast. It's not all we talk about. We talk about other things. But on Deprogrammed, it is what it is always what we talk about, and by necessity. So on Deprogrammed is a show that we do whenever we have a topic that relates to my old belief system or somebody we want to interview about it that is going to come at it from a different angle. Then we do a Deprogrammed episode. But Daily Covfefe is a live show that we do on Mondays and Fridays. But just because of how the ideology is ramped up in the past few years, we necessarily talk about this on Daily Covfefe now all the time too. It's just it just is what's going on, right? Yeah. But so we talk about it quite a bit. My frustration comes from sometimes feeling like this is so patently, obviously wrong and awful. Why do I have to keep pointing out how awful it is? Because someone like that woman at my church, for example, if I were to say, like, they're attacking objectivity and individualism. Like, can't you see this? Why do we have that? Should be the end of the conversation. That this is a bad ideology.
They're attacking science, okay?
Yeah.
Shut down STEM, decolonize science. And people are like, oh, well, they just want to make science accessible to everyone. Science is accessible to everyone, right?
Yeah.
Again, I'll go back to the religion thing. If you just go follow some ex-Muslim women's accounts, just follow them for a couple of days. And,
who would you suggest, by the way? I mean, I know some of these, but just for any...
There's Zara Kay. There is Ilan Mania. She's actually a Reform Muslim. She's in Switzerland. There's Asra Nomani. There's a woman in...
I didn't know some of these.
There's a woman in California, a friend of mine. She's ex-Mormon, ex-Muslim. She was raised Mormon, then she converted to Islam. Now she's ex-both. You can find her as Murtad Milli. But what I'm saying is, when you look at the hate they get from Muslims, it's like, you left Islam because you want to fuck white men. You left Islam because you're a slut. You want to be a whore. Guys get some of this too, but the women just get it the worst. And one of them recently, she was like, I support Black Lives Matter, but I don't support the organization. Like, I support the statement, not the organization, which is
right.
Same thing.
Valid, same.
And she was told, well, the only reason you're doing this is because you want white dick. The exact same thing. Wow. Now you look at people like, okay, I'm not a fan of Candace Owens, but you look at some of the stuff she gets, or people like Coleman Hughes or John McWhorter or Camille Foster. Oh, you're an Uncle Tom, you're a coon, you're a house slave, and they don't use the term slave, and then you look at like Majid Nawaz.
Oh, it's the same hate.
Yeah, it's the exact same hate. It's the same thing. Now, there was a guy, like, right when the riots and everything started and the protests, a couple of people did these things on, they put out the threads, and if you want, I'll send them to you there. It's about media. And so they show it was like pretty stable up until around 2000, it started going up. But then by the time, a little bit, but by the time Obama's first term comes in, you just see this explosion. It's just an exponential growth. So by the time Obama's first term started, it almost doubled. And by the time 2015 came around, it almost tripled. The amount of times they used the word racism, racist, white supremacist, privilege, all those things. Another guy just did it on articles. It was basically the same thing, like just tripled. Right? Yeah. So you had them pushing this. You had them pushing that. And I'm like, if you're getting this kind of stuff, people are buying into it. It's so that, you get the same hate for ex-Muslims as you do for people who are speaking out against this. People are saying this more and more and more, so it's like it's becoming indoctrinated. So you were told one way to look at things, and I mean, like saying, you can go back and you can look at in the early 2000s, Majid Nawaz being called a house Muslim, a native informant, and not even the early 2000s, like 2012, 2013, Sarah Hayter, another like very reasonable person, and she's being called a native informant, Uncle Tom, race traitor, and it's the exact same things. Like these, that they think in the exact same way. It is so scary how religious like this stuff is.
Yes,
and it's very fundamentalist. And people are going to say, "Don't
it
attack
is
my
fundamentalist."
Like, I don't know if you know Paul Vanderklay.
Oh my gosh, Obed, we just got to interview him.
He's awesome. Paul's great.
An episode coming out this week, maybe today, on the program with him.
Yeah, Paul's awesome. I mean, okay, like Paul's a pastor. I'm an atheist. We've had a couple of conversations. I want to he invited me on his Discord server. I don't go on much because whatever. I'm a Luddite and I don't know how to use it. But no, but I mean, like Paul, like I can have a more reasonable conversation with Paul than I can do with one of these so-called progressives.
Yes, because they are, like you said, they're fundamentalists.
Yeah.
And there's no room for any kind of, there's no room for conversation.
Nope.
I'm surprised on their list of things they're attacking as whiteness. I'm surprised they didn't have conversation on there. Conversation and civility and dialogue,
Yeah. But I mean, that's just it. Like the things that they list off, I mean, that should be a red flag to you. That should be a red flag to anyone. That, they're saying civility is a white person's thing. Like there was one this morning, she was arguing with James Lindsay, and she's saying that arson was only a crime arson was only a crime because white people invented it as a crime, and it's a white law, and that's why burning down buildings in North America doesn't matter because it was stolen from people of color. I'm like, okay, but first of all, there was arson law, and I was like, as soon as I heard it, I'm like, that's ridiculous. Japan builds everything out of wood and paper. They must have had some sort of arson laws in medieval Japan, and sure enough, they go back to the 1200s. Like there were arson laws in ancient Egypt. Like it's just they say these things, and it's verifiably untrue. But people like, oh, there was no word for rape in North America until the settlers came. That's right. There was no English word for rape because the English brought it with them, you idiots. I'm sure they had a concept of it. Like they
had a concept of it. Yeah, but maybe there's no word for rape because it wasn't considered wrong. Yeah. Who knows?
Yeah, I mean, or whatever. Like Saudi Arabia has less rape than the United States, but it's okay to rape your wife because if your wife refuses sex, the angels will curse her all night long, right? It's ridiculous. It's just...
Yeah. So you said you were talking about the stats on the media using words racism and white supremacy.
I'll send you the links.
Oh, okay, cool.
There's two people. One person's I think they're doing that's what they're doing their PhD on, and I can't remember what the other person was doing. Like if I knew what tools they used, I'd like to do it for Islam and Islamophobia. Because I was speaking to a friend of mine recently, and I was joking around. I said, you know what? If you look at when this stuff came into schools, you look at when, like this specific iteration of it, and around the late 90s is when these people started coming out with intersectional masters and stuff, right?
Yeah.
So they started going to media. Bush gets elected, so you might have one or two people in media, right? And they're pushing this thing that, well, America's racist because it's against Islam. Islam is a brown person's religion. So that was like proof of concept. And by the time Obama comes around, they just push the racism thing because they've got enough people in there that they could push crazier and crazier stuff. Okay, this is a tinfoil hat. This is a tinfoil hat theory, whatever. But that's what I'm thinking. Like the Islamophobia thing was a proof of concept.
Obed, whether or not it was, you've accurately described how this worked, though. Yeah. It's like so the people my age. I'm 41, so I preached this for about 20 years. I was indoctrinated in college. People my age went into media, journalism, entertainment like I did, academia, and big social. A lot of my old friends work for Google, like a lot, YouTube, places like that. They're Facebook. We went in and we were taught to push this as like little activists, and whatever our career was, whatever our field was, this was primary. And I think at the beginning, like I think back to my early years in entertainment, I was definitely in the minority in terms of I managed comedians. I was known as being the feminist manager. I was a bit of a weirdo. Like I was the one who was, I guess I'm always going to go against the group, huh? Because originally I was like the one SJW manager pushing crap, and now I'm the one who's like, guys, no. And they've all become woke now. But yeah, there was when we first, people my age, I think, first moved into spaces, we would find other people who shared our ideology, and the more you find, the better, and you can push it further. But wow, where it's at now, I don't think I ever could have imagined. Like the old me would be very happy. The old me would be like, yeah, we're succeeding, we're changing the world, we're making it better. I was a true believer. I wasn't cynical about it. I believed this was a good belief system and that it was about eradicating the world of racism and sexism. I was just very naive about the fact that I was being used to push those very things. But yeah, once we've reached a critical mass where, gosh, any company now, you don't need it to be the whole company. You don't need it to be the whole workplace. You just need enough of them, and they need to be loud enough. And the culture at large needs to change enough, which it has now, where it's accepted this, that, I mean, you can talk about people being canceled. You can get anyone thrown out of the workplace now.
But, okay, the lawsuits are coming. I've already seen a couple in New York City. There's a woman suing the Department of Education. She worked there, and she's saying, like, it was basically anti-white racism. There are, I believe there's Asian parents that are going after the school system.
Yeah.
There's...
I've seen one from California, too.
So, I'm sorry, this thing from the city of Seattle, like, that's institutional racism. Yeah, fine. Yeah. Way to go. Now we have it. Now you have something to fight. It's like they created the thing they wanted to fight.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, here's another, sorry, I wanted to mention this to you. You might want to get some tinfoil because you're going to get dumber after hearing this. But I'm going to say something really stupid, then I'll explain it. Okay. This whole thing comes down to travel mugs.
What?
Okay.
Okay.
Right. Have you ever called your local phone company or your internet provider or your cable company, and you're speaking to the help person, the support person, and they're going off a list, right? Like they just don't deviate from that list. You go online, you got to fill out insurance. They make everything so easy. You don't have to think. We're losing the ability to think. They're making you safe. They want to make everything so simple. Yeah. So that's why I say the travel mugs. It's basically a sippy cup for adults. When adults admit they need a sippy cup, they're admitting they can't do anything, for Christ's sakes. So it's like, but I mean, it's this need to feel safe, and it's making us dumber. Sorry, when I was in Haiti, I noticed this. The people there was very few people who would think for themselves. Like we had to hire local people, so I was in charge of the IT. We hired local IT staff. One of the things I said was, okay, everything's ready for this office. I'd like you guys to go deploy all the computers, get them all ready on all the desks. When it's all done, come back and we'll make sure everything works. They come back and they tell me, yeah, we put all the computers on the desks. Should we put the monitors as well? Because I didn't specifically tell them to put the monitors. They only put the computers. Okay. Now that's what this kind of thinking is like. So when you call that support person, they only know to go off that list. They don't know, anything different. Like you're asking them for a piece of information, but it's not on that list, so they don't know how to give it to you.
That's a great.
Yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
Well, that's a great analogy. Yeah, because they repeat what they've been told. So this is you will see them repeating "silence is violence" without having thought about what that means and whether they actually agree. Or, but when you try to get them to go off script, when you ask them, that's one of the best things I think you can do for someone who's got pulled into it. And somebody gave me this. I was asking, what's the best advice to give people who have friends who are getting pulled into this or family? And if you can ask questions that force them to go off script and think for themselves, you might have a chance of them, like of a seed being planted maybe to combat it. But it is like a script they're reading. Yeah. So if you ask something that's going to cause that cognitive dissonance, it's funny they put cognitive dissonance on there about whiteness because this ideology is built on cognitive dissonance. Silence is violence, but words is violence. Like, how do you reconcile those two things? How can speech and silence be violence? There are some easy questions that would kind of cause anybody that's got a bit of a functioning brain left to like think about before they could answer. And I think you really have to ask those questions in love too, not in a gotcha way.
Yeah, no, exactly. Okay, I'll give you an example. Well, two examples with myself. Before COVID shut everything down, there's a little pub near my house. Every Monday night they had they play cribbage, so I went there. And one of the nights, one of the guys who plays, he brought his girlfriend, and I was playing one of the games against her, and we just started talking, right? Like we're playing a game of cribbage, we're talking. she mentions that she's taking cultural studies, and so I asked her some, like, I wasn't like, I said, what are you doing, whatever, and some of the stuff came up, and I just stopped her for a second, and she's like, oh, well, and then I went through a list of things of, like, where some of these ideas came from, like that Plato quote and things like that, like where math comes from. And I said, well, how can you say that this is all whiteness? So you're denying we played, there's 20 minutes to play cribbage. We're in a pub where, there's a few of us playing in that group. We're talking back and forth. By the end of the night, she's like, took down my podcast name. She said, I'll go listen to it. I don't know if she did or not, but at least she was like, okay. I just told her, I said, I just laid out some facts. I wasn't yelling. I wasn't screaming or anything like that. I was just like, how can you reconcile, like you said, how can you reconcile this with this? And at that same place, a couple of weeks later, it was some random person there, and she was speaking to a friend of mine, and they started talking about quantum physics. So I got interested, and I started talking. And then her and I started talking, and then this whole the queer ideology comes up because she says, "Oh, I'm queer," and blah blah blah. And I started talking about the books I'd read. And I started talking about, and because I haven't read a lot of queer theory, I've read a lot of critical race theory and intersectionality. Right. But I've read a little bit of Gail Rubin, read a little bit of Judith Butler. Even if you go back to Foucault, Butler, he's got like some of the queer stuff in his things. And then I got her to explain to me how Pete Buttigieg was not a gay man. Right, like the whole thing. He's not really gay. He's just a man who sleeps with other men. Okay. And so she started going through it. It took her about 20 minutes. By the end of it, she was giggling and she was laughing. She couldn't keep a straight face, but she was still holding on to her belief that, oh no, he, just because he's got so much privilege, he's not really gay because he doesn't have. And it was just, but like, just
that's
her
what
explaining.
They say now about race too.
Really
black. Yeah.
But her just talking me through it, right? Like I just asked her the question, like, and then she's doing it in her head. And then she's realizing kind of how silly it was, and she's giggling. I mean, I didn't make her a non-believer or anything.
Yeah, but it makes her realize, a little bit.
Yeah, just a bit.
Good. That's a great example. Yeah, just planting a seed that maybe makes them think a little bit more. Okay,
and again, I'll use Maajid Nawaz. I have some issues with Maajid about his reform, but I think on the whole, he's a good person. But what they're talking about, the de-radicalization with Quilliam, he said, like, one of the biggest things is to plant a seed of doubt. So you don't want to convert this person from Islam to being an atheist. You want to convert this person from being a Muslim who's willing to go kill the infidel in the morning to being a Muslim who will just cheer on the person who kills the infidel, right? You want to plant enough doubt so they take one step back. So that's, I mean, honestly, like that's
a great way of putting it.
You have to look at, they are in a cult. If it's your friends, your family, there's going to be a lot of recrimination. They're going to say hateful things towards you. Be ready to forgive them if and when they decide to leave this. And it's not forgiveness out of you're better than them and like it's actual. They've been caught up in a really screwed up way of thinking. And but I mean the best thing is to ask questions and let them answer it. And this is my opinion, and like again, different people have different approaches, but if you get them to explain those inconsistencies, you might cause just a little bit of doubt in them.
Yes.
And then slowly you can chip that away. That's why I say it's better to do it before they get radicalized than it is after.
I totally agree. Well, that's what Carter on our show, he really focuses on people who haven't yet been indoctrinated about inoculating them against it, and he kind of laughs at me because he says I tend to be more like he sees the burning building and he starts digging a moat around the building, but I'm running into the building trying to pull people out, like, come out of this ideology, it's going down. So, but I don't know. I don't spend, I guess I do a little of both. When I talk, I'm hoping that people who haven't bought into it yet hear what I'm saying and that it does inoculate them against it. But yes, part of me does. I hope that there are people who are in it who can also, I do think of that person. I do think of my old self. Yeah. And what would make my old self question or start to think about things, Yeah.
And again, like I said, my approach is one way of doing things. And it doesn't mean that I only do that, right? Like if I, that woman I came across in the pub. And it wasn't my intention to go to that pub that night and I'm going to convert someone, right? We just started talking. And when we started talking, I had no clue. And it just, because I honestly was curious, and I think she saw that I was curious, right? And, I think she appreciated the fact that I had read a lot of intersectionality and a lot of critical race theory.
Yeah.
At least I showed her that I wasn't ignorant about this stuff.
So you knew what you were talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that's why I think, again, you can't deconvert someone from Islam if you don't know anything about it. You can't deconvert someone from Christianity if all you know is that Jesus is the Son of God, right? Like you need to know more than that. So don't fall for the don't fall for the BS. Don't fall for the little simple explanations, and really go looking deep into it. Look, I don't want to. Go ahead.
Struggle sessions.
Yeah, we didn't even really have much, but I mean, it was just we were just kind of talking about them.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. There have been. I mean, there are a lot of these workshops now where people can go and it's called interrogating their whiteness, and those are becoming more prevalent now. I think those people who run those, I think of them as snake oil salesmen.
Oh, God,
they're going to be making a lot more money now that this has gone mainstream, because now that you've learned that your whiteness is a problem, how do you deal with it, right? Like, so those things almost operate as struggle sessions when you're in the room. You know, I really want to go to one of these undercover as a white lady. Oh God,
I mean, I'd love to go to one of them. Okay, I took one of these in 2014, and it wasn't quite this, right? It was, so I started working for a government, and it was up in northern Canada, so there was Inuit, so there was cultural sensitivity training, and it was the first time they were giving this specific brand of training. And this guy was spouting some of this, but I don't think he had any clue what he was talking about. He was just reading off, you know. And there was myself and this other woman who were in this course. Because at one point, he was talking about how you have to look at people when they say something, they're thinking it's coming from a place of good. So he said, you know, Hitler thought he was doing good, which fine, whatever, I can accept that. And then he goes through his argument, which the argument wasn't bad, because if you look at Hitler didn't do it because he thought, I'm the most evil person in the world. He thought he was doing good, right?
Right.
But then he says, so like the person who wrote it, his name was, you know, so-and-so. And he goes, his last name is Jewish and his first name is Jewish. So he's doubly Jewish. And I mean, this guy was teaching us cultural sensitivity. So me and this other woman were like, pardon? Like, what are you saying in this class? And like, there was a woman from HR taking the course with us because it was the first time this course was, so she was evaluating it. We're like, how can you talk about cultural sensitivity when you say something like that?
Yeah.
Like, oh, and I mean, the guy was talking about, again, the Crusades. There was the couple of Crusades. I'm like, no, there was at least a dozen major Crusades, and there was like, hundreds of little minor ones, like, the two Crusades. I'm like, there was like, it was just call the fact. Like, I'd like to go there just to call the bullshit out, especially if it's a white person. I'll play the brown card. I will. I don't want to, but in these situations, I can. And it's like, no, but it's ridiculous.
This looks like a job for a brown person.
Yeah, but it shouldn't have to be
a white lady.
Look, I don't want to keep you too long because I know you got stuff to do. Yeah. So, if you want to let people know where you can get them, any last words or words of advice for people?
Wherever you listen to podcasts, you can find us. We're Unsafe Space. Mm-hmm. And Obaid mentioned we have two shows. We do Deprogrammed, which is specifically about my old ideology, the social justice ideology. And then we also do Daily Kafefus, the live show Mondays and Fridays where we talk about whatever's in the news. But thank you so much. Oh, we have a book club too. Speaking of, we just read Ordinary Men, which is all about how you get, you're talking about people who do evil thinking they're doing good. It's how you get ordinary people to commit atrocious acts of evil. It was about a reserve police battalion that was sent from Germany, that was sent to Poland during the Holocaust and was tasked with exterminating, hundreds of thousands of Jewish people. And it's excruciating to read, but it's also really important right now, especially when you get to the end part with the analysis, where it talks about, they underwent, in addition to their training as police officers and all the physical training, they underwent weekly indoctrination. I wrote down the name of this workshop you mentioned in Seattle, Racial Superiority and Whiteness. They were going to seminars like that every week, okay? Like they were being indoctrinated every week. And it's very relevant. But so, we have a book club. You can find out about the book club at unsafespace.com if you want to join.
I will. Okay, just on that, if there's a book you guys are going to do in your book club, it's called The Ballad of Abu Ghraib. It's by Philip Gurevich. Now, there's also a documentary that was done separately by this guy named Errol Morris. Errol and Philip worked on the two kind of together. Now, they went through like millions like I think it was I can't remember. It was like millions of like hours of footage, basically. Like they interviewed everyone in the Abu Ghraib prison, like, you know. And then he starts talking about the pictures. Like there was that one picture. I remember this specifically. There's one picture of a naked, whatever terrorist or whatever in the cell in the prison, except he had a poncho on, and that picture went out, and everyone was freaking out because it is a horrific picture. But if you step back, excuse me, it's not COVID. If you step back and look what that picture actually was, one of the hardest prison guards or whatever, MPs in that cell block, this guy was an absolute asshole. He saw this guy shivering because it was winter in Baghdad and it was cold, and the guy was naked in his cell, so he gave him a poncho. The poncho was an act of kindness, but you saw the picture, and it still looks bad. I'm not saying like Philip Gravage does not defend what these people did. He tells you how the system had gotten so screwed up, like how the prison went from civilians who were ex-wardens, ex-prison guards, who were trained, who came and actually managed a prison, as opposed to MPs who'd already done 1 year, and they were I think it's called stopgap, where they were it's not stopgap, but I forget the term, where they were refused to go back after the rotation and kept on extra. So they'd already been there longer than they should have, and they get sent into something they don't know anything about. So, like all these videos that we're seeing, right? You're only seeing that little snippet. You don't know what happened before. You don't know what happened after. Like, take everything with a grain of salt. It's a really good book, and it gives you.
I wrote it down. Yeah, I will check it out.
Yeah. Anyways, I should let you go.
Ballad of Abu Ghraib.
Yeah. And sometimes, or like there's a thing called standard operating procedures. He might have changed the name, but I've got it as the Ballad of Abu Ghraib.
Okay.
But anyways, thanks a lot for coming on, and thanks
you
everyone
for having me.
Yeah,
it was
no
fun
problem.
to talk to you again, Avery.
Yeah, no problem. And thank you everyone for listening. I'll be back.